Hi, Richard.
Hi.
My name is Bill Albrecht, and we have Dennis Paula here.
Okay.
And I'm going to let Dennis take the lead because he's the person who's done interviews in the past.
Okay. And is Josh joining us?
Okay.
The one who invited me?
Pardon me?
Or Josh is the one who invited me?
Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't count anymore. So okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how much you were told, but we have a nonprofit called globalconscience.world. We're trying to do something a little bit different. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to help deal with the global warming issues and the climate emergency issue right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought we could maybe do something that would sort of bring together people from all over the world because it's a worldwide issue. So whether or not we or China, whoever might be the most serious contributor, in order to solve it, we just think that there's going to be an advantage in having a lot of people come together. So a lot of it's going to be sharing information. So in the process, we're looking at a lot of things. And we ran across, of course, the issue with the early blooming cherry trees. Mm-hmm. And we're referred to you as someone that might like to be able to talk about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Let me explain one thing. Well, I'm going to just explain one thing, what we're trying to get accomplished here. We have a program that we call Ambassador Program, and we're in about 12 or 14 countries, and we just started this in the last 60 days. We have about 30, 40 ambassadors. We're planning on having thousands of ambassadors all over the world in every country. What these ambassadors are designed to do is to spread the word in their country and social groups to let us to help solve the problem of global warming. So the idea is that we're going to be in every country. We'll be able to go every language, and we have a number of promotions to make this happen. And we're really excited because what we're trying to do is that the things that we're doing here to show interviews, talk there, we want to spread this worldwide to all the countries. In other words, these ambassadors are designed to be people that connect with their social networks in their country and spread the word.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's what we're trying to put together.
How long has your organization been around?
Global Conscience has probably just been born in the last 4 or 5 months.
Okay. And do you have a group in China also?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, we let me explain one more further what we're doing. We had a film festival that we ran 3,000, we got over 3,000 films from all over the world, from over 100 countries. There's 194 countries. We're having a film festival now. And I'm a little further and I want to explain, but I'll go ahead and do it. Is that we're having a film festival for songs all over the world. We're having a song promotion. We want people to inspire in these songs to, and actually we're going to be having somebody who wrote a song to inspire people to join the organization through songs throughout the world. In other words, our ambassadors and our filmmaking producing friends, we're going to be asking them on our list of 750,000 to produce films for us to take, have people write songs, take it to their bands and their most famous in their countries, their famous bands, and sing a song and send it to us. And then we have we developed in the process of like a Netflix, so people be able to go see the songs. We need to drive traffic back to our site, and the songs will do that besides other things like what we're doing today. So that's what we're trying to put together. It's a very aggressive project, and it's unique, but it is working. And we've been around, the Rainbow Movement has been around for about 4 years. I've been working on this project, but we worked on other things, but Global Conscience is something brand new to us about the last 6 months.
What other projects were you involved in besides climate change?
We have the 1% solution. It's a mortgage, Remortgage America, to stimulate the economy. And we have a national health insurance.
What is a 1% solution?
Dennis, can you explain that? Dennis is a PhD in economics.
Yeah, the idea was to have the government issue mortgages to people who are qualified at a 1% mortgage rate. And the idea, we tried this years ago, actually, to try and prevent the Great Recession, actually, because it was tied up with pretty corrupt mortgages that people were buying into. So the idea was essentially it would allow more people to become homeowners rather than renters, which would allow them to build equity rather than to spend their life paying rents. It would help the racial inequity issue by allowing people, minorities, to also have a better shot at buying homes. And in the old days, prior to the recession, it was to prevent the foreclosures that were basically guaranteed by the essentially crooked mortgages people bought. And so that was it. The idea was simply to bring more people out of renting and into home ownership. And part of the other racial part of it is that Brookings did a study that said that the single most important factor in explaining these sort of educational, financial inequities between Blacks and whites is home ownership. And Blacks have been prevented from home ownership for all sorts of different reasons for years. So a lot of those things have been taken away, but we still have a financial inequities that are bad enough so that we thought this might help at least get started in the right direction. And then there's also the affordable housing issue. We thought it could help, but it would put more money into the economy. If you remortgage an existing home, you're going to have, depending on what you paid for, maybe $400 or $500 a month extra to spend. As that gets spent, it'll spin out and basically help the economy across the board. So that was the idea. And the idea would be the government's not spending money exactly, they're just lending money. So the money would be paid back to the government. It's not like a gift or anything, and it's only to people who were financially qualified.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we have the National Health Insurance. Dennis can explain, but make it real simple. It's a better insurance company backed by the government for the American people that probably cut the rates at least in half. It is a very complicated plan. It'd take us a while to explain it, but I think the booklet's like over 20 pages that we put together. Plan. It took us a year and a half to put it together.
So it sounds like you have a strong social agenda.
Yeah, the idea was that we need something better than we've got, better than we had, and the Medicare for All solution doesn't seem to be very likely to go through. So this would be an alternative where if the government created a new insurance agency, kind of copying the efficiency of Medicare, and got rid of inefficiency, corruption, fraud. It looks like you could cut premiums in half. And by doing that, it would be a huge boost to business and individuals. And by saving money, the government's already subsidizing things under the Affordable Care Act. The government would save enough money to not pick up the people who are currently uninsured. So sort of something we thought would be better. And because it's not a government handout or a government takeover, we thought it might be a possible alternative solution.
And we thought Republicans and Democrats would like it, both of them, because it is a plan that makes a lot of sense, and we took a lot of time and energy to put it together. But here again, to put plans like this, we have two plans that are really good for the American people. But the problem is we don't have any power to really push it through. All we can do is write them up. We found that these plans don't go very far, even though they're good plans, unless you have some sort of oomph behind you. And that's what we're trying to do now.
Join the Democratic Party.
They were so caught up with Medicare for All, they wouldn't even listen. It was really strange. I could talk to people at meetings, or I tried to talk to some people at some community park events, and they just sort of turn around. They thought Medicare for All was the only thing, and any alternative they just dismissed. So it's kind of scary that they wouldn't at least sit down and listen. But we actually thought Republicans might like it also, because it it's good for business. I mean, businesses would, their expenses would go way down by having lower premiums for all their employees. So, but both sides are locked in. Both sides are getting enough money from the current system to not really want to buck it. But anyway, those are the things that we're working on.
Okay, well,
And one of the
So-
things I mentioned too is that what we're
Pardon me?
designing here is that we're trying to get our ambassadors and everybody else, the people they contact, to send emails to make change in the world. And somehow maybe today, when we talk with you, we might ask you, and we will ask you, how can people respond? How can they help? How can they send an email? What can they do from home to change the planet on the course that we have?
should we talk about cherry blossoms then?
Yeah,
Yes.
and I looked at what you do, and cherry blossoms are obviously one part of all the work you're doing. That's connecting plants, animals, insects, humans, all of this thing, and looking at the effects on timing and the changes being caused by global warming. So it looks like you probably have a lot to say about more than just cherry blossoms. But yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
I'm a professor. You wind me up and I talk.
Good. So what do you think? Wait, let me tell you what I thought as a starting point. The cherry blossoms was interesting. The part that was the most interesting to me was that they've been doing studies for a number of years. Look, what's happening to the timing of the blossoming relative to temperature changes. But they were experiments. And then all of a sudden they're realizing things are moving faster than they thought. And that's the part that caught me. How many of the studies that are being done are actually underplaying how serious the change is?
What do you mean by underplaying?
That things are happening faster than they thought. The cherry blossom, that's just one example.
Well, I mean, cherry blossoms are something that people have noted in many different countries and many different circumstances. So people are very interested in cherry trees because they're extremely beautiful and they have a lot of cultural significance. And people have been following them for, more than 1,000 years in Japan, for long periods of time, especially in South Korea, for 100 years in the United States. And I mean, the reason that people follow them so closely is because they want to know exactly when the trees will be in full flower, because then they have a big festival. It's actually difficult for anyone to really appreciate how significant the Cherry Blossom Festival is in Japan unless you've been there. I mean, in Japan, everything stops for several days when they have the Cherry Blossom Festival. People just have big parties for several days, from work, from school, from people's families. They all just go out under the cherry trees and they have a big party. They eat, they drink, they dance, they play music. And so people have been very concerned to predict when exactly the Cherry Blossom Festival will happen. And one thing which people have been noting is that the Cherry Blossom Festivals are getting earlier. And they're getting earlier because the climate's warming. So we know the climate's warming because of weather observatories. So there's very good records of temperature, but the cherry blossoms are the best biological indicator of climate change. So the cherry blossom festivals are a way of just showing that the warming temperature is affecting the plants and animals of the world in which we live.
Okay, and you're doing something similar though with the timing of other plants, migrations with animals, that kind of thing as well. At least I think you are.
Well, I'm doing a lot of different things. So, I mean, I've worked very closely with colleagues in Japan and South Korea. So I was on sabbatical leave and visiting at the University of Tokyo about 15 years ago. And then I began working with scientists from Japan and also scientists from South Korea. And Japan in particular just has this incredible treasure of records, some of which go back all the way to the 8th century, and a lot of which are scattered around the country, or which have, there are more than 100 observatories around the country, weather observatories, where people are also recording cherry blossom festival times, similar networks in South Korea. So I work still with colleagues from Japan and South Korea, looking at cherry blossom festivals. And again, you can see it's happening earlier. But my own research is based in Massachusetts. So I'm doing many projects looking at flowering times of plants, leafing out times of trees, and also the migration time of birds in the spring and the fall. And all of these we're using as indicators of climate change. So in particular, in spring, things are happening earlier, and in the autumn, things are happening later because the cold weather starts later in the autumn. The work which we're doing in Massachusetts is most notable because the person who kept the best records in the past of when things happened was Henry David Thoreau, the famous environmental writer who wrote the book Walden. And in the 1850s, Thoreau kept extremely detailed records of many natural history phenomena, including flowering times of plants, leafing out times of trees, and bird migration times. So our group matches Thoreau's observations with modern observations to see the effects of climate change.
Okay, and some of the, excuse me, some of what you're doing, you called ecological mismatches. Can you explain what that means?
Right, so that what we've found and what other people have found is that species respond very differently to the effects of a changing climate. So in the spring, it's really spring temperature, which is a huge driver of when species wake up from winter dormancy in the spring. And it turns out that the different species and different groups of species respond to global warming differently. And there's a very precise relationship between different species. Species fit together to form a biological community, or you could say kind of an ecological relationships. And we find the species are responding differently to climate change. Some species are responding very rapidly to warming, some species very slowly to warming. And if one species is responding very rapidly, another species is responding very slowly, and they depend on each other, this might result in an ecological mismatch where species which depend on each other, which help one another, wind up getting disconnected, and therefore it's a mismatch, and one species might suffer. One of the classic species groups that people are always looking at for mismatches is between birds and insects and plants. So birds are not responding to climate change as much as plants and insects. So people think it's possible that in the spring, if birds are not arriving when the trees are leafing out, when the plants are flowering, and when the insects are active, that birds might miss out on getting enough insects to feed themselves and to feed their nestlings in the spring. A mismatch that we're working on very actively, myself and various colleagues, is a mismatch between trees and wildflowers. Because we found in the last 100 years that the trees are responding more rapidly to climate change than the wildflowers. And the wildflowers generally come out earlier in the spring than the trees. And they need a period of several weeks in the early spring in order to get full sunlight, to actively photosynthesize early in the spring. And over the last 100 years, because trees are leafing out ever faster because of warming temperatures, that period of full sunlight for the wildflowers is getting smaller. And so we think that the wildflowers might start suffering a mismatch with the trees and not get enough energy to be able to grow and flower and fruit in the future.
I've read articles about how the insect issue, for one, and the warmer winters is already affecting agricultural production. Do you look at that at all, or?
Well, we can see that the changing climate is having, a diversity of effects. So it isn't just temperature that's changing. I mean, we also see, for example, the sea level is rising. We often have droughts in many areas of the United States, particularly the Western United States. But also a lot of our agricultural and forestry systems are changing because of climate change. And one example of that, which you might be referring to, is that because of warmer winters and a lack of frost during the winter, we're now seeing a lot of insect outbreaks in ways which we didn't see in the past. So in the Western United States, pine beetles were often controlled by freezing temperatures in the winter, and we often don't have these extreme cold winters in the Western United States. And so pine beetle populations are increasing and they're attacking and killing the pine trees. I mean, in New England, we have some pest insects before which used to be controlled by freezing temperatures like the woolly adelgid, which attacks hemlock trees. And because of warmer temperatures, the populations of woolly adelgid are increasing, and they're also spreading further north, and they're killing hemlock trees, throughout the range. So this is an example of where insects are attacking trees. In the case of agriculture, we have changing conditions right now. So in many areas of the United States, the conditions are getting hotter and drier. In New England, they're getting actually hotter and wetter. And this means that our agricultural systems are changing and that farmers either are not going to change and are going to suffer crop failures, or they're going to have to spend a huge amount of money kind of rebuilding their farms for new crops, which can survive under these new climatic conditions.
Do you, sort of an odd question, are the things you're following and talking about right now, can we talk about those as being the problem, or are they like the canary in the coal mine?
Well, they're both. I mean, I think that a lot of people think that climate change is going to happen in the future. They think that's not going to be very serious. Actually, in northern climates, a lot of people welcome climate change because they think it's going to be nicer to have earlier spring and milder winters. But our world is set up for a particular set of conditions, and it's not set up for the new set of conditions. So, for example, our cities are built on a certain global temperature which locks up a lot of ice in glaciers and on polar ice caps. And if the temperature gets just a few degrees warmer, like we've already experienced and it will continue, then the polar ice caps and the glaciers are going to melt. And this is going to cause a rising sea level, which is going to be flooding a lot of coastal cities like Boston and Miami and New York City, New Orleans. And so this has, dire consequences for the coast of the United States, the coast of many cities around the world, like London, like cities in Bangladesh. So there are really kind of huge consequences for climate change to the world. And our research, it's an indicator. You could say it's a canary in the coal mine, but it's also something which has consequences in itself. Because when we're seeing earlier flowering time, it also has consequences in itself. So for example, a lot of agricultural trees like apple trees and cherry trees and peach trees, if they flower too early in the spring, they're affected then by late winter frosts, which wind up killing the blossoms. And that's happened now recently in New England a few times. Warm temperature in March winds up stimulating apple trees to flower very early. And then what happens is that you have an April frost and it kills the blossoms, and the apple trees never produce a crop of apples that year. So these changes in flowering time, changes in leafing out time, also have very serious and often very negative consequences for the species involved.
Apple trees sound very scary to me. They don't flower, and that could happen for years, possibly.
Well, that's right. So what happens is that when the flower blossoms are killed, then there's no apples that year, and there might not even be any apples the next year. So it can really have a very serious consequence. Um, and this is going to be affecting really areas throughout the United States. So in the southern United States, for example, um, what can happen there is that the winters are so mild that the trees don't get enough cold weather to really um, cause a very strong flowering in the spring. So the most strongest flowering of fruit trees occurs when you have a cold winter followed by a warm spring. And in the southern United States, if the winters are not cold enough, it means that the trees don't really wake up very strongly when the spring happens. And they wind up having they wind up having a later spring, or they wind up having a much more staggered set of blossoms, which don't really encourage strong pollinator activity. In the case of the Western United States, climate change might mean heat waves during the summer, and the temperatures might get so hot that it winds up just kind of drying out the leaves or drying out the developing fruits, and then the plants are weakened.
Do you think the reporting on what you're talking about is having any effect on the deniers? Is this?
Well, the number of people who deny climate change, every year it's getting less. The American public overwhelmingly recognize that a warming climate is occurring. The evidence really is overwhelming, and the vast majority of the American public believe it. They understand the science. They can see that the temperatures are getting warmer based on the scientific evidence and just based on their own experience. We know, I think it's overwhelming that the American public recognizes that it's really human activity which is causing this. It's the burning of fossil fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas. And it's the cutting down of tropical forests, which is all releasing carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. People recognize that. The real big discussion is sort of, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to kind of adapt to it? Are we going to just kind of gradually get used to warming temperatures and, change our cities to get used to it? For example, have more air conditioning, plant more shade trees, build bigger seawalls? Or are we going to try to be proactive and try to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? So that's really, really where the discussion should be in the United States and internationally. Not whether climate change exists and whether people are causing it. It really should be about, how are we going to deal with it? What's the best technology and how much money we're willing to spend?
Do you have ideas? What? I'm an economist, but I actually have a specialization in environmental economics. And economists have not done a very good job with their little supply and demand models at helping get solutions to the problem. Their studies tend to put off solutions until we've got more information, which has been a mistake. But what ideas do you see, and what do you see that maybe individuals might be able to do on their own?
Well, I think that people should try to deal with climate change through their own individual activities. So people can make choices as to how much carbon dioxide they're producing themselves and other greenhouse gases. But the greatest thing that we need to do is to come to some decision as a country, and then also getting the United States involved in international treaties, especially with China, to really reduce this problem. Because this is really it's really a national problem and an international problem. And individuals have to make choices themselves, but ultimately it's only by changing the society at a national level and international agreements that are really going to solve this problem. And it really needs to be done by, taking strong actions to reduce carbon dioxide. And this can be done either through regulations, which very strongly encourage or force people to produce less carbon dioxide, or it can be done through, economics. As you know, as an economist, a tax could be put on carbon dioxide, and that carbon tax would wind up, making people produce less carbon dioxide. So the government, for example, could just regulate that cars have to be more fuel efficient, could regulate that public transportation should be more heavily invested in, and people should be encouraged to take public transportation. Or you can put a carbon tax on it, and that would have the same effect.
Okay, as an economist, I always like that's what we did, the carbon tax idea. I always compare that with what happened when we realized that lead and DDT were as bad as they are, and we just said that's it. We're outlawing DDT. We're outlawing lead in gasoline and in paint, and we're not going to take sort of an economic approach, which is to sort of tax people away from certain activities, which we do with cigarettes. It hasn't been all that good either. But that's probably what I was saying. I think over the years, I was also involved with fisheries. I took courses in the fisheries department at the University of Washington, which also had a lot of cherry trees. But what I saw from the fisheries side is that the economists wouldn't go along with the biologists who wanted to put in strict regulations on fishing. And one of the results was essentially wiping out the Cape Cod fisheries, which are now sort of coming back. But I'm sort of willing to defer to the biologists on a lot of this stuff. And I think that the biologists for a long time and other scientists have made it clear that this problem is real, and we should be doing something much more serious than we are doing. But then the question I had is, what is conservation biology?
Conservation biology is a relatively new discipline within biology that really developed over the last 30 to 40 years. It's an area of biology which seeks to document and study the diversity of life in the world, both the diversity of individual species and communities, and also the genetic variation within species. It seeks to identify and investigate the threats to biological diversity, so things like habitat destruction, climate change, pollution. And then the third part of conservation biology is it seeks to develop practical methods for preventing the further destruction of biological diversity, and also tries to restore biological diversity back to its original condition. So you can tell I'm a professor, and you gave me a stock question, and I gave you a stock answer.
That's okay. We watched a documentary called Seaspiracy, which fits into sort of what you're talking about. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
What's it called?
Seaspiracy.
I don't know what it is.
Again, because I was my dissertation was on fisheries economics. It was a model for regulating commercial fisheries. So this means more to me than other people. It was a documentary basically showing the incredible damage being caused by fishing, commercial fishing in the oceans, and how they are destroying the oceans, basically. And we need the oceans. And there's some parts in it that I wasn't sure made sense. Some of them went against the population dynamic stuff I studied a long time ago, but I never knew how good or accurate that really was, or whether it's just sort of academic games playing with fish populations. So, but anyway, if you haven't seen it, then you wouldn't want to comment on it. I was kind of curious as to whether or not some of the things in it were sort of stretching the truth, but they painted a really grim picture of flat out destroying the ocean. They started with the idea of sharks. We're killing off sharks. By killing off sharks, we're allowing the second layer in the rankings to sort of increase their population, which then affects all the others all the way up and down, which is kind of what you're talking about, but in an ocean setting. And but it's a scary thing. Their solution was, we have to stop eating fish. And they also tried to make the argument that the ocean is maybe more important than land issues, trees and whatever, in terms of global warming, getting the world sort of back in some sort of a balance. And but I know you were also tracking global warming on forests. No, if it's just rainforests or tropical forests. And it sounds like you were doing some sort of real world studies with that as well.
That's right. So I've had a long-term interest in the forests of Southeast Asia, and particularly on the island of Borneo. And the group that I'm working with has been monitoring forests there since the 1960s, looking at the same forests over time. And recently, kind of an international group has been taking all these different studies of tropical forests from around the world, from Africa and Asia and the Americas, and bringing all these studies into one place, and then using these to see how these forests continue to store carbon dioxide, and also to what extent these forests will be able to adapt to a changing climate. And so this is really, kind of a very exciting study. It's what you might call big data, where people are taking hundreds of large studies and bringing them into these even larger studies. And again, to see how these forests will be responding to climate change. I mean, one of the kind of the big parts of climate change is that climate change is not only caused by the burning of fossil fuels, but it's also caused by the cutting down and burning of tropical rainforests, especially in Southeast Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia, and countries like Brazil. And we need to better understand that process in order to prevent climate change. And it also hints at one of the solutions. So one of the solutions for dealing with climate change, part of the solution is also to be replanting these tropical forests, and also to replant forests in the temperate zone as well, because the trees growing will be able to absorb some of the carbon dioxide, but still only a small percentage.
How much of that is the destruction of the forests tied to economics, where people are trying to survive and they don't have alternative employment?
Well, in the past, people often said that the destruction of the tropical rainforest was caused by people practicing subsistence agriculture and needing to cut down forests to create new farmland for themselves, a type of agriculture called shifting agriculture or slash and burn agriculture. But certainly over the last several decades, in the Americas and in Asia, that the greatest amount of clearing is being done by corporations for plantations or for large-scale commercial farming. So in South America, the greatest clearing of tropical rainforests is to create new fields for soybeans in particular, and also for cattle ranches. And in Southeast Asia, the forests are being intensively cleared for creating oil palm plantations in particular. And so a lot of the cheap oil that comes into the United States, both for food and for cosmetics, is really this kind of cheap palm oil, which is coming from vast plantations in Southeast Asia.
Okay, what can people do about this? If you want to try to change something like this, how would they go about trying to make a difference and sway people to make change? Corporations, governments?
You mean in terms of palm oil?
Any of this that you're talking about taking action. How would they take action? How would they take action? In other words, we're looking for our people that are involved with this to go ahead and send emails to a government or a corporation, tell them we don't like what you're doing. We don't want you cutting down the forests, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think the answers are really to do things both as individuals. So as individuals, you can live a life which produces less carbon dioxide. So for example, things that you can do are to use public transportation more, or to buy a smaller, more fuel efficient vehicle, to live in a smaller house, or to live in your present house, but don't warm it as strongly during the winter, and don't turn on the air conditioning as much during the summer. To eat a diet which is more a vegetarian diet rather than a meat diet, because meat diets generate a lot of carbon dioxide. To be more involved in recycling things. At a local level, get your local town or city government to take actions locally. So in the United States, local action is something that is very effective at creating change relatively rapidly. So for example, in Newton, Massachusetts, where I live, there's a very big program to electrify the city's vehicle fleet, and to very strongly encourage people to use less fossil fuels in their homes. So these are all things which are being done on a local level and also on a state level. So there are often subsidies for people insulating their homes and things like that. But the greatest differences are going to be really by getting the national government to be involved. And again, for the national government, the answer is to vote for people who take strong actions on climate change, and also to join political parties, whichever party you want to join, but or even a third party, but join political parties and advocate very strongly for people taking action on climate change.
Those are good things to say, and for them
Okay,
to
well,
take action.
I think I'm going to sign off now. We've been talking for 45 minutes, and good luck with your program.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yes.
see you later.
Thank you for your
Okay.
time.
You.